He grew up in a small, worn-down house at the edge of the city, where the streets were dusty, and the walls of his home seemed to lean in closer each day. The house was crowded, and his family struggled to make ends meet. There were days when there was little food on the table and nights when the power would go out, leaving the small room filled only with the soft whispers of the wind. Yet, even in the middle of all these difficulties, he found joy in small things, like the sound of a bird outside his window or the laughter of children playing in the street. From a very young age, he was drawn to music. But he had no proper instruments. Instead, he made do with what he had. A tin can become a drum, an old stick became a drumstick, and scraps of string tied between boxes became a guitar. He would sit for hours, banging and strumming, trying to make the sounds in his head come alive. His neighbors often shook their heads at his strange little instruments, thinking it was just a child's foolish play. Even his schoolmates laughed sometimes, calling him a dreamer with no future. But he did not care. Music was the only thing that made the noise of hunger, fear, and doubt disappear. He went to the local school where the building itself seemed tired. The walls were chipped, and the playground had uneven stones where grass refused to grow. Still, he loved going there, because it gave him a chance to meet other children and to dream a little bigger. Teachers noticed he was quiet, often lost in thought, doodling notes and songs in the margins of his notebook. When asked to read aloud, he struggled. When asked to run fast, he tripped over his own feet. Yet, when there was music, when someone hummed a tune or the school bell rang, he would tap along or hum in harmony, unnoticed by most, but always fully present. At home, he had responsibilities. He helped his mother fetch water, carry groceries, and watch over his younger siblings while she worked long hours. There were many evenings when he sat in the corner, watching his family eat a small meal while he went hungry, thinking about the songs in his head. He wished he could find a way to make those songs real, to make people hear what he felt. But how could someone like him, with so little, ever get a chance? One day, while wandering through the marketplace, he saw a man playing a violin. The sound was so beautiful it stopped him in his tracks. People gathered around, tossing coins into a small case, listening to the music float into the air. He watched the man's hands move with such ease, creating melodies that seemed to lift the sun higher in the sky. His heart ached and soared at the same time. He wanted to run up to the man, to ask him how to play like that, but he stayed at the edge of the crowd, listening, memorizing, and dreaming. Back home, he tried to copy the sounds he had heard. He hummed, tapped on tins, and pulled at strings. He imagined that the songs were escaping from him, filling the room, filling the tiny house with a warmth that had been missing. He played until his fingers hurt, until his voice was hoarse, until the moon rose high and the house was quiet. His siblings often peeked at him curiously, wondering why he spent so much time with nothing but cans and strings. Sometimes they joined in, making clumsy beats or humming along, and for a moment, the small house felt like a concert hall. School was not easy. His clothes were old and patched, his shoes worn thin. Other children whispered and pointed, calling him poor. He felt their eyes like heavy stones, but he refused to let it stop him. He kept his head down, did his work, and when he could, he sang softly to himself. Music became a shield, a way to forget the pain of being underestimated. Every day, he imagined a world where people would listen to him, where they would see the beauty he carried inside. There was a small park near his home where he sometimes went to sit quietly. He loved the way the wind moved through the trees, how birds sang without concern for the world around them. One afternoon, he found a broken piano in the corner of the park, abandoned and covered in dust. He ran his fingers over the keys, some of which made sound, some silent. He tried to remember the melody of the violin man he had seen in the marketplace. His heart raced as he played a simple tune, imperfect, yet full of feeling. People walked by, some glanced curiously, but most ignored him. He did not mind. For the first time, he felt like music had found a way out of his head and into the world. At home, his mother noticed his dedication. She did not understand all of it, but she saw the joy in his eyes, the way he would light up when he hummed a new tune. She began saving a little money when she could, buying him scraps of sheet music or small things to help him practice. It was not much, but it was enough to let him know that someone believed in him. Sometimes, she would sit quietly, listening to him play his improvised songs, and tears would fill her eyes, proud and sad at the same time. His life was still full of hardship. There were days of hunger, of cold nights, of arguments and stress. But music became a constant friend, a companion that never judged him or made him feel small. In school, the other children continued to underestimate him. Teachers often overlooked his potential, thinking he was distracted or lazy. Yet, in the quiet corners of the classroom or in the empty alleyways after school, he practiced relentlessly, shaping the songs in his mind, learning to trust his own abilities. One day, a school event was announced, where children could perform any talent they had. Most students laughed at the idea of him performing. "What can he do?" they whispered, but he felt a spark of hope. He asked his mother if he could try, and she smiled and nodded, offering what little she could to help him prepare. He worked every evening, practicing on his makeshift instruments, trying to get every note right, trying to feel every emotion fully, knowing that this could be his chance to show the world who he really was. The night before the event, he could hardly sleep. His mind raced with melodies, rhythms, and harmonies. He imagined the faces of the audience, imagining their surprise, their smiles, their tears. He knew it would not be easy, but he felt a deep determination, stronger than the fear of being laughed at or rejected. He told himself that even if no one clapped, even if no one listened, he had to play. Because music was not about them. It was about him, about his heart, and about the story he had carried for so long. As the morning light broke through the small windows of his home, he felt a quiet calm. The streets were waking up, the smell of bread and smoke drifting through the air. He took a deep breath, picked up his tin drum and string guitar, and walked to school with careful steps, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. He did not know what awaited him, but he knew one thing. He was ready to let the music speak, ready to show that a poor boy with nothing but dreams could carry a song that no one would ever forget. After the school event, life seemed a little brighter for him. Though he had performed on a shaky stage with a small, uneven audience, something inside him had shifted. For the first time, he felt the music he loved so much reaching beyond the walls of his home, touching others in ways he had only dreamed of. Though many still overlooked him, a few teachers and classmates had noticed the emotion and effort in his performance. It was a small recognition, but to him, it felt like the first step toward a world that had never paid attention to a poor boy like him. The days after the performance were filled with a mixture of excitement and struggle. He wanted to improve, to learn more, but he had no money for proper lessons or instruments. He began searching the streets and alleys, hoping to find something discarded that could help him practice. Sometimes he found old strings, broken pieces of wood, or worn-out sheet music, and he would rush home with treasure in his hands, imagining the melodies that could come from them. Every discovery was a small victory, a sign that he could keep moving forward even without support. At school, the whispers continued. Some children mocked his makeshift instruments or teased him about his patched clothes. Yet, he had started to notice that a few faces had changed. Some classmates looked at him with curiosity, maybe even respect. They saw a boy who worked tirelessly, who refused to give up despite challenges. And slowly, those whispers began to include questions. How do you make that sound? Can you teach me that song? These small openings, though timid, made him realize that his music could be a bridge, connecting him to others who once ignored him. One afternoon, while he wandered through the park, he heard another musician playing a violin. The melody was different from the one he had heard before, lighter, happier, yet filled with emotion. He stood quietly, letting the music wash over him. He noticed how the musician's fingers moved, the way the bow glided over the strings, the small nuances that made the music alive. His mind raced, thinking of ways to replicate the sound with his improvised instruments. He tried to remember each note, each pause, each rise and fall of the melody, and he made a promise to himself to practice until he could capture that feeling. At home, he began experimenting more boldly. He combined the tin drums with the stringed boxes, trying to mimic rhythms he had heard. He sang with his small, raw voice, sometimes missing notes, sometimes hitting them perfectly. His mother often watched from the doorway, her hands busy with chores but her heart full as she listened. She didn't understand all the technicalities, but she understood the passion, and she silently encouraged him every day. Sometimes she would bring him small treats, saying it was for the hard work he put into his music, and he would accept them with a shy smile, feeling both loved and motivated. One day, the school announced a citywide talent showcase. He wanted to participate, but fear crept in. He was unsure if his music would be appreciated by strangers, unsure if his homemade instruments would be taken seriously. Yet, he remembered the small moments of joy, the few smiles he had seen after his last performance, and he decided to take the chance. He began practicing harder, staying up late into the night, refining the songs that had lived in his head for so long. Every note he played carried his dreams, his struggles, his hope. As the showcase day approached, his determination only grew. He visited the park often, testing his songs in front of trees, stones, and the occasional passerby. He imagined their faces, the emotions his music might stir. Sometimes, a stranger would stop and listen, nodding or clapping, giving him a tiny spark of confidence. Other times, people ignored him, walking past quickly, leaving him alone with the echo of his music and the soft whispers of the wind. He learned to play not for recognition but for the music itself, letting it flow through him freely. At school, the children who once teased him now watched with quiet curiosity. Some of them offered to help him carry his instruments. Others simply observed from a distance, unsure of what to expect. The teachers began to notice too, especially one who had a gentle, understanding demeanor. This teacher offered him advice and guidance, showing him basic musical techniques and encouraging him to believe in his talent. For the first time, he felt that someone saw not just the poor boy, but the potential within him. The night before the citywide showcase, he could hardly sleep. He replayed every melody in his mind, adjusting rhythms, imagining harmonies, feeling the story his music would tell. He worried about making mistakes, about failing, about being laughed at by a crowd he had never seen. But beneath the fear was a steady flame of courage. He reminded himself of every moment he had struggled, every late night, every improvised note that had carried him this far. If he could reach this stage, he could reach anyone. The day of the showcase arrived. The venue was grand, a stark contrast to the small, broken stages he had known. Bright lights shone down, and people filled the seats, chatting and laughing, unaware of the story waiting to unfold on the stage. He clutched his instruments tightly, feeling the weight of both fear and anticipation. Backstage, he watched the other performers, some confident, some nervous, each bringing their own style and story. When it was his turn, he took a deep breath, stepped forward, and began to play. The first notes were shaky, a reflection of his nerves, but as he continued, something magical happened. His music, raw and heartfelt, began to flow. Each beat, each strum, each note carried the years of struggle, the long nights, the hunger, and the hope. The audience, initially quiet, began to lean in, captivated by the honesty of his performance. Some faces softened, some eyes widened, and soon, a few tears glistened in the corners of their eyes. They did not see a poor boy with broken instruments. They saw a soul pouring itself into the music, a story unfolding through melody and rhythm. When he finished, the hall was silent for a moment, as if everyone was holding their breath, absorbing the emotion he had shared. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the room, growing louder and louder until it became a wave of appreciation. He felt a rush of emotion, a mixture of relief, joy, and pride. For the first time, he understood that his music could touch hearts, that his voice, however small and raw, could make people feel deeply. It was more than recognition, it was connection, the bridge he had dreamed of for so long. After the showcase, several people approached him. Some offered kind words, some asked about his techniques, Others simply smiled, acknowledging the beauty of what he had created. A few musicians, impressed by his talent and determination, offered guidance and even small opportunities to learn more. He walked home that evening with a lighter step, carrying not just his instruments, but a newfound sense of belonging and purpose. Back in his small home, he shared the story of the showcase with his family. His mother listened with tears in her eyes, proud and amazed. His siblings crowded around, excited and curious, wanting to try the tunes themselves. For the first time, the music that had been his secret, his private escape, became a shared joy, bringing his family closer together and giving them a sense of hope that they had long needed. That night, as he sat with his instruments in the quiet of his room, he realized that the journey was only beginning. There would be more challenges, more doubts, and more obstacles ahead. But he also knew that his passion, his determination, and his love for music were stronger than any of them. He had discovered a truth. Talent and heart could break barriers, and even a poor boy with little could make the world pause, listen, and feel. With that thought, he closed his eyes and imagined the melodies yet to come, ready to continue the journey that had already begun to change his life. After the citywide showcase, the boy's life began to change slowly, but not without new challenges. People had started to notice him, but not all attention was kind. Some children at school, jealous of the applause he had received, began to whisper behind his back, spreading rumors and making fun of his humble beginnings. Even some adults doubted his abilities, questioning how a boy with broken instruments and little training could ever succeed. Despite this, he felt a quiet strength growing inside him. He had touched hearts with his music, and that was something no one could take away. He continued to practice every day, refining his songs and experimenting with new melodies. The small tin drums, stringed boxes, and makeshift instruments had become extensions of his own emotions. Every note he played carried the weight of his struggles and the hope he had for the future. Sometimes he played for hours in the quiet corners of the neighborhood, letting the music speak when words could not. The wind, the trees, and the passing birds became his audience, understanding him in ways that people often could not. His mother noticed his dedication and determination. She tried to support him in every way she could, saving small amounts of money to help him buy better materials or transport to events. She had seen the transformation in him. The confidence, the focus, the light in his eyes that had never been there before. She reminded him gently that hard work and perseverance were the keys to keeping the dream alive. He listened, absorbing every word, knowing that her belief in him was as important as any applause he could receive. One day, a local music teacher who had heard about his performance reached out. She had been curious after reading about the showcase and wanted to see his talent firsthand. When she met him, she was impressed not only by his skill but also by his determination. She offered to teach him basic techniques and introduce him to proper instruments. For the boy, this was both exciting and intimidating. He had spent so long learning in his own way, relying on instinct and feeling, that the thought of structured lessons felt strange. But he knew that this opportunity could open doors he had never imagined, so he accepted with humility and eagerness. The lessons were not easy. The teacher expected him to understand theory, timing, and precision, things he had never thought about before. Sometimes he felt frustrated, his fingers stumbling over notes he had played perfectly in his own style. At first, he wanted to give up, thinking that maybe he was not meant for this world of proper music. But then he remembered the faces of the audience at the showcase, the tears, the smiles, and the quiet moments of awe. He realized that he had something worth protecting and developing. He practiced harder, often late into the night, blending the techniques he learned with his own raw style. Slowly, his music began to evolve into something richer and deeper. Meanwhile, at school, things remained complicated. Some students continued to tease him, while others were curious and wanted to learn from him. He began to understand that attention could be both a blessing and a challenge. He learned to ignore the negativity, focusing on the people who believed in him and the music that had become his refuge. The playgrounds and classrooms were no longer just places of struggle. They became places where he could quietly share his passion with those willing to listen. opportunities began to appear beyond the school. A local community center invited him to perform for a small gathering of neighbors. At first, he hesitated, unsure if his music could reach new audiences. But he remembered the first showcase, the citywide applause, and the sense of connection that music had given him. He agreed, and on the day of the performance, he carefully carried his instruments and stepped onto the small stage. The audience was simple but attentive, and as soon as he began to play, the room fell into a hush. His melodies carried the emotions of his life, the struggles, the hopes, the silent nights filled with dreams. People listened, moved by the raw honesty of his music, and some even shed tears. He realized that no matter where he played, music could touch hearts in ways that words often could not. The performance at the community center brought new recognition. A few local journalists wrote short articles about the boy with extraordinary talent, describing how someone from such humble beginnings could create music that moved people deeply. Though the articles were brief, they began to spread his story, reaching ears and hearts beyond his neighborhood. Some people offered small donations for instruments or lessons, while others offered guidance and mentorship. Each gesture, no matter how small, reminded him that persistence and talent could eventually open doors. Despite these positive developments, he faced personal struggles as well. The pressures of performing, learning new techniques, and balancing schoolwork weighed heavily on him. He sometimes felt exhausted, overwhelmed by the expectations he and others had placed on him. On those days, he would retreat to the quiet corners of his home or the park, letting the familiar rhythms of his homemade instruments soothe him. Music became not just a tool for expression but also a source of comfort and healing. During this period, he also began composing his own songs. Unlike the melodies he had learned from others, these songs came entirely from his heart. Each note, each rhythm, each pause told a story of hunger, of hope, of perseverance, of small joys hidden in a difficult life. He wrote about the nights when the wind whispered secrets through the cracks in his window, about the laughter of his siblings, about the tiny moments of kindness that had kept him going. Composing became a way to process his emotions, to understand the world around him, and to share his perspective with anyone willing to listen. One afternoon, a small music contest was announced in the city. It was for young talents, and participants would be judged by professional musicians. Many people discouraged him, saying he was too inexperienced, that others had better instruments and training. But he felt a quiet determination. This contest could be the next step, a chance to show that talent and heart mattered more than wealth or status. He began preparing with renewed focus, blending his own style with the techniques he had learned. Every day was filled with practice, sometimes in the early morning, sometimes after school, often continuing late into the night. His fingers ached, his voice tired, but he refused to stop. As the contest day approached, nerves settled in. He had never performed in front of professional musicians, people who knew the rules and standards of music deeply. The thought of failing in front of them frightened him. Yet, beneath the fear was the same flame that had carried him through the citywide showcase and the community center performance. He reminded himself of all the nights he had spent alone, playing to an empty room, imagining the faces of those who might one day listen. Those moments had prepared him for this stage. When the day arrived, he entered the grand hall, carrying his instruments with careful hands. The stage lights were bright, the audience large, and the air thick with expectation. He waited backstage, listening to other performances, feeling both admiration and anxiety. Finally, it was his turn. He stepped forward, heart pounding, and began to play. The first notes were cautious, but as he continued, the music flowed from him naturally, carrying the stories of his life. The judges, initially reserved, leaned in, captivated by the depth and honesty of his performance. The audience responded quietly at first, then with growing applause as the emotions of the music reached them. When he finished, the silence lingered for a moment, filled with the weight of shared experience. Then, applause erupted, louder and more heartfelt than he had ever heard. Some faces glistened with tears, some smiled in amazement, and a few stood up, moved by the young boy who had poured his soul into music. For the first time, he felt that the barriers between his small life and the larger world were beginning to fade. His music had spoken, and people had listened. The day of the big performance finally arrived. It was an event organized for young talents from across the region, and the hall was filled with people who had come to see and hear what the children had to offer. The boy felt a mixture of excitement and fear. His heart raced as he held his instruments tightly, remembering every practice, every struggle, and every moment he had spent dreaming of this day. He knew this could be the moment that changed everything. Backstage, he saw the other performers. They were well prepared, some dressed in neat uniforms, holding shiny instruments, and confidently chatting with their friends. He looked down at his own patched clothes, his simple instruments, and felt a pang of doubt. Could he really compete with all of this? The memories of the years of practice and the small victories gave him strength. He reminded himself that music was not just about instruments or appearance. It was about the story, the heart, and the emotions he could convey. When his turn was called, he stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright, and the audience seemed enormous. For a moment, his hands shook, but he took a deep breath and let his instincts take over. He began to play. The first notes were soft, hesitant, but they carried the depth of everything he had experienced. He played from memory, from feeling, from the very core of who he was. Each beat, each string, each hum was a part of his life, telling a story that had been waiting for this moment. At first, the audience seemed quiet, unsure what to expect. But slowly, as the music unfolded, something changed. The melodies were filled with raw emotion, not perfect in technique, but perfect in honesty. People leaned forward, listening closely. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. The boy did not see them clearly, but he could feel their attention, their curiosity, their hearts beginning to respond. He played every note with passion, letting the struggles, the nights of practice, the small joys, and the pains of his life pour out. He noticed small gestures from the audience. A parent wiped away a tear, a young child smiled softly, an elderly person nodded in understanding. Each reaction encouraged him to continue, to play louder, to let the music soar. He felt a freedom he had never known before, a connection with people that went beyond words. It was as if the music had created a bridge between his life and theirs, and every note he played strengthened that connection. His fingers moved over the instruments with growing confidence. He had learned to blend the old techniques he had discovered with the new lessons from his teacher. The rhythm of the tin drums mixed with the gentle strumming of the strings, creating a sound that was uniquely his own. He had taken the melodies he had imagined and composed them into a performance that told his story, one of struggle, hope, and unbroken spirit. For the first time, he felt fully in control, fully alive in the music. As the performance continued, the audience began to react more visibly. People leaned forward in their seats. Some whispered in awe. Others nodded in recognition of the emotion in the music. He noticed tears glistening in several eyes. He did not stop. He played on, letting every feeling guide his hands and voice. The hall was silent except for the music, as if everyone had been drawn into the story he was telling. For the boy, time seemed to stretch. He forgot the bright lights, the large audience, the other performers. All that existed was the music and the connection it created. Each note carried memories of nights alone, of patched clothes, of broken instruments, of encouragement from his mother and teacher, and of the small victories that had led him here. He poured his heart into the performance, letting the audience feel the journey he had taken. When the last note faded, there was a pause. The audience seemed to hold its breath, absorbing the weight and beauty of what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, applause began. It started as a ripple, grew louder, and finally erupted into a wave of appreciation that filled the hall. People stood, clapped, and some cried openly, moved by the music that had come from a boy who had been underestimated by almost everyone he had ever met. The boy stood there, breathing heavily, feeling a mixture of relief, joy, and disbelief. He had done it. He had shared his music, his story, and it had touched hearts in ways he had only dreamed of. He looked at the faces in the audience, saw smiles, tears, and expressions of pure emotion. For the first time, he realized that talent and passion could overcome circumstance, that a poor boy with nothing but determination could make the world stop and listen. After the performance, several people came forward. Some wanted to learn how he had created the music. Others offered encouragement and advice. A few local musicians offered mentorship, invitations to perform, and small opportunities that could help him grow further. The boy listened, absorbing everything, feeling grateful and inspired. He knew this was just the beginning, that the road ahead would be filled with challenges. But he also knew that he had proven to himself and to the world that he belonged in the world of music. When he returned home that evening, his mother and siblings waited. They had heard about the performance from neighbors who had attended. Tears filled his mother's eyes as she embraced him, proud and amazed. His siblings crowded around, eager to hear everything. He shared the experience with them, describing the audience, the applause, and the feeling of the music connecting with so many hearts. For the first time, the music that had been his secret and private joy became a shared celebration, bringing his family closer and filling their home with hope. That night, he sat in his room, alone with his instruments. He replayed the melodies in his mind, thinking about the journey that had led him here. From the small, crowded home to the marketplace, the park, the school, the citywide showcase, and now this performance, he realized how far he had come. The music had been his constant companion, his voice, and his guide. It had transformed his fear and struggle into something beautiful that others could feel. He closed his eyes, imagining the next songs he would create, the next stages he would perform on, and the countless hearts he might touch with his gift. In the following days, the recognition of his talent continued to grow. The story of the boy who had been underestimated spread through his city. People spoke of the performance, of the raw emotion, and of the inspiration that came from someone who had nothing but passion and determination. Invitations to perform at local events and small gatherings began to arrive. Teachers, neighbors, and strangers alike started to see him not as a poor boy from a small neighborhood, but as a musician with a gift that transcended circumstance. Despite the growing attention, he remained humble. He continued to practice in quiet corners, to explore new melodies, and to nurture the passion that had carried him this far. He remembered the nights of hunger, the long walks to school, the broken instruments, and the doubts he had faced. Those memories were not sources of shame. They were reminders of where he had come from and the strength that had brought him to this point. Every note he played was infused with gratitude, resilience, and hope. As the days passed, the boy understood a profound truth, that talent alone was not enough, and opportunity alone was not enough. What mattered most was heart, determination, and the willingness to continue despite the odds. He had learned that even when underestimated, when overlooked, or when doubted, a single person with passion could create a ripple that touched many lives. Music had given him a voice, and he was determined to use it fully, knowing that this was only the beginning of a journey that could inspire, heal, and connect people in ways words alone never could. After his breakthrough performance, the boy's life began to open in ways he had never imagined. People from his city and beyond wanted to meet him, hear him play, and understand the story behind the music that had touched so many hearts. It was a mix of excitement and fear. He had grown used to performing alone in quiet spaces, but now the world seemed to expect him to share his gift constantly. Despite the pressure, he felt a deep sense of purpose, knowing that his music could inspire, heal, and connect people. He continued his lessons with the local teacher who had first guided him. Under her guidance, his skills improved even further. He learned new techniques, studied rhythm and harmony, and began experimenting with compositions that were more complex. Yet, he never lost the raw, heartfelt quality that made his music unique. Every song he played still carried the essence of his life. The struggles, the hope, the determination, and the small joys hidden in everyday moments. He understood that it was not perfection that mattered, but honesty and passion. Opportunities began to grow. Local events, small concerts, and even charity gatherings invited him to perform. Each time, he carried the same excitement and nerves, remembering the boy who had first tapped on tin cans and strummed strings made of scraps. The audience often included people who had never expected a poor boy to create such music. Some came skeptical, only to leave moved, sometimes with tears in their eyes, sometimes smiling quietly, touched by the authenticity of his performance. He learned to read faces, to sense emotions, and to play in ways that connected with everyone present. His school life continued alongside his growing music career. Some students who had once mocked him now asked him questions, wanted to learn about his music, or simply listened in awe as he shared his experiences. He remained humble, never forgetting the early days of doubt and struggle. The teachers who had once overlooked him now spoke with pride, recognizing the hard work, discipline, and resilience that had carried him to this point. Slowly, the boy became a symbol in his community, not just for talent, but for perseverance and hope. The boy also began mentoring younger children who shared his passion for music. He visited local schools, teaching them small techniques, encouraging them to practice, and sharing the story of how music had helped him overcome challenges. Seeing the joy and curiosity in the children's eyes reminded him of himself years ago, full of dreams, struggling, but never giving up. He realized that his journey was not only about his own success, but about inspiring others to believe in themselves and the power of persistence. Recognition continued to grow beyond his neighborhood. Local media began to cover his story, sharing the tale of a poor boy whose music moved everyone in tears. Articles, short videos, and radio stories introduced him to people who might never have heard of him otherwise. Some musicians reached out, offering guidance, collaboration, and new opportunities to perform on bigger stages. Each step forward reinforced his belief that talent and heart could break through any barrier, no matter how difficult life's circumstances might be. Despite the increasing attention, life at home remained grounded. His family continued to struggle with finances, daily chores, and small hardships, but music had become a source of connection and joy for them all. The boy often played at home for his siblings, sharing new melodies and improvisations. Sometimes, they would join in, clumsily tapping, humming, or clapping, and the small room would fill with laughter and music. These moments reminded him why he had started in the first place: the love of music, the comfort it brought, and the bond it created between people. He also reflected on the lessons learned along the journey. He remembered the first violin he had heard in the marketplace, the abandoned piano in the park, the teachers and neighbors who had believed in him, and the countless nights he had spent practicing alone. He understood that every struggle, every act of perseverance, and every small victory had shaped him, preparing him for the moments when he could truly shine. Each note he played was a tribute to the path he had walked, the people who had helped him, and the strength he had discovered within himself. As he matured, he began composing larger, more complex pieces. Some were inspired by the streets and the lives he had witnessed, others by the emotions and stories he carried inside. His compositions often moved people deeply because they were authentic. They were not just melodies, but expressions of lived experience, carrying the weight of dreams, hardship, and hope. Audiences responded to the honesty, and the boy found that connecting with others through music was the most powerful reward of all. With growing recognition, he faced new choices: invitations to perform in bigger cities, professional training, and collaborations with experienced musicians offered opportunities that had once seemed impossible. Yet, he remained mindful of his roots, never forgetting the neighborhood, the family, and the challenges that had shaped him. He approached each opportunity with gratitude, humility, and the same determination that had carried him through the earliest days of tapping on cans and strumming strings made of scraps. The boy's story began to inspire people not only through his music but also through his example. Community members, local leaders, and even strangers saw that dedication, perseverance, and heart could overcome adversity. His journey became a living testament to the idea that talent could not be measured by wealth, social status, or circumstances, but by passion, resilience, and courage. People who had once doubted him now shared his story, encouraging others to nurture their own dreams, no matter how unlikely they seemed. He also realized the importance of giving back. He began organizing small workshops for children who could not afford formal music lessons. He shared instruments, taught basic techniques, and encouraged creativity. Seeing the joy on their faces reminded him of the boy he had once been, and he felt a deep sense of purpose. He learned that music was not only about performing, but also about sharing, inspiring, and creating spaces where others could discover their own voices. As he looked toward the future, he saw endless possibilities. He dreamt of performing on bigger stages, composing original music that could reach far and wide, and continuing to inspire others with his story. Yet, he also knew that the essence of his journey lay not in fame or recognition, but in the love for music, the resilience he had discovered, and the ability to touch hearts through honesty and emotion. Every note he played, every song he composed, carried the weight of his life, the hope for the future, and the stories of those who had supported him along the way. In the quiet moments, the boy often reflected on his journey. From the small, worn-down house, the improvised instruments, the nights of practice, and the first shy performances, to the applause, recognition, and opportunities that now surrounded him. He saw a path shaped by determination, courage, and passion. He understood that his music was not only a gift for himself but also a bridge to others, connecting people through shared emotion, inspiration, and understanding. Ultimately, he realized that being underestimated had been a catalyst, a challenge that forced him to dig deeper, practice harder, and believe in himself. The hardships he had faced became the fuel for his creativity, the foundation of his character, and the story that moved people to tears. He understood that music, when played from the heart, could transcend barriers, communicate beyond words, and create moments of profound connection. The boy continued to play, to compose, and to inspire. His story spread, reaching people who found hope in his perseverance, courage in his example, and joy in the melodies he shared. Though he began as a poor boy underestimated by everyone around him, he had become a musician whose heart and passion touched the lives of countless people. His journey was a reminder that talent, when combined with resilience and love, could overcome the harshest obstacles and leave a mark on the world that would be remembered and cherished forever. Every time he played, he carried the weight of his past and the hope for the future. The music was no longer just for him. It was for anyone who needed to feel inspired, comforted, or understood. He had discovered a truth that would guide him for the rest of his life. That no matter where one comes from, what matters most is the heart, the determination, and the courage to keep pursuing what one loves. And through his music, he continued to show that even the most underestimated can create beauty, touch hearts, and change the world.